Oh, buju kakana wea, wazawa bene sindagu, makwa endo dame bawating and doing jaba. A bawating is skonigan and bean the gay be a gaz guy. Nunga medash special gawaba begana kagenda. Hello, everybody. My name is Wayne Soames. I am a citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians, where I'm from, Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, there. And today I live near the White Earth Reservation, and I am the tribal liaison for MAHUBE-OTWA Community Action Partnership here in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. And today I'm extremely excited to introduce our special guest, James Vukelich, a descendant of Turtle Mountain, a renowned international speaker, author, and digital creator who is known for his social media series, Ojibwe Word of the Day. Recently, he's released his first book, The Seven Generations and the Seven Grandfather Teachings, and today he is here to talk about those teachings. James.
Aho, mi gwech Wayne. Inkechi mi gwech Wayndom chikagi gadayan o omanungom. Engamachita, buju in the noi maganato, ganin. Kage gabo and dijinakas. Mekanak can do them. Mekanak wajuing and dunjaba. Beshoga kabakong and danongom. Apichigo mi gwech. Bisindawyeg, minamadash gana wabam ye get yo. Engashaganashim gaye. So I will also speak a little English. And what I said there was a protocol greeting. I said, hello, all of my relatives. My name is Kage Gobble. I'm also James Vukelich. I'm Turtle Clan. I'm a descendant of Turtle Mountain. I live close to Minneapolis today. And I am delighted for the opportunity to speak to you all about this concept that shows up internationally in Indigenous country, in Indian land. This idea of 7 generations. And for example, when I say international, the Lakota warrior and holy man, He Hakasapa, Black Elk, he spoke of a time after that terrible battle and massacre at Wounded Knee, that it would take his people, the Lakota, a period of 7 generations to make the hoop of life whole again with the Wasichu, with the Americans. For him, this was a unit of time. I heard as a young man this teaching that came from the Haudenosaunee speaking people, the Iroquois. And when Dagana brought the great laws of peace to his people, Dagana the peacemaker, he told them that in every one of your decisions, in every one of your deliberations, you will have to think 7 generations into the future. And the first time I heard that, I found that very profound. But it was also a little confounding. How do we do that? How do we come up with an action, a choice, a decision that'll affect someone we'll never see, we'll never speak with, we'll never listen to, or hold? How do we come up with an action that will affect someone 7 generations from now? And what I would love to present to you all this morning, and maybe into the first moments of the afternoon, is an Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Chippewa, Nookaway, Saulteaux perspective of that. Each one of those names is referring to the same group of people. And in Minnesota, we use the term Ojibwe and Anishinaabe interchangeably. So I'll use those for this talk. And I'm going to share my screen, make sure that we can all see this. And hopefully, can I check in and ask, can you all see the 7 generations and the 7 grandfather teachings? I hope so.
Yep, it's up there.
Fantastic. So let's start here. This was a petroglyph at one point. That's from Petro stone and glyph to write. And today we are using PowerPoint with Zoom. So the media has changed, but the message is still the same. And in this first generation here, we have Neen, that's I, me, myself. Here's our next generation. Noos is my father, and Ninga is my mother. And here's our next generation. Here we have Nimishomis, my grandfather, and Nokomis, my grandmother. And I think we can make a really strong case that this sound, noko, for nokomis, for my grandmother, that this dates back to prior to the ending of the last ice age. That means where I'm at right now in Minnesota, and perhaps where you're at, when this was a mountain of ice a mile high, there was someone who saw woolly mammoths, giant moose. They saw misamik. That's our word for giant beaver. It has in it mis, giant, and amik beaver. A beaver the size of Makwa, a black bear. And if you can imagine Makwa at that time, he stood 11 to 12 feet tall on his hind legs. There was someone who saw these magnificent megafauna, who saw a mountain of ice before Gichigami, the great sea of the Anishinaabe, Lake Superior, existed, who called his or her grandmother that sound, noko. And we don't know what the ending could have been, nokomatha, nokomathe, nokomala, nokomasa. But we know that that noko sound was there. And I love sharing that with people, because so often our history begins with contact. And that's a very important part of our history, but comparatively speaking, it is a drop in the bucket. Our history and our relationship to the land goes back millennia upon millennia, thousands upon thousands of years. Then we have our next generation in Donako Bitchigan. This can mean my grandparent, my great-grandparent, my great-grandmother, my great-grandfather, but it doesn't just mean that. It has in it this morpheme. And a morpheme, it's the smallest part of a word that carries meaning. This particular morpheme, unik, fascinated me at one point in my life. And I'd like to share with you all, maybe introduce myself a little more in depth, how I became so kind of obsessed with this morpheme. And it begins with me, Kage Gobble, Indigenous cause. I'm also James Vukelich. My name is Kage Gobble, he who stands eternally. I really didn't hear the Ojibwe language until I was a 25-year-old man. I was originally going to be a French teacher. I had studied film and video, moved to English literature, discovered French literature, became utterly enamored with it, and decided that the best way to learn the French language was to become totally immersed in it. So I moved to Quebec in Canada. I did French immersion at the University de Quebec at Trois-Rivières. And when I came home a year later, I had every intention of becoming a French teacher. And when I got back, I needed to take another course to get my financial aid package, to qualify for grants and loans. And I saw Ojibwe was being offered. And at this point in my life, I've studied French, a little bit of Italian, even some Latin in middle school, and decided, well, Ojibwe, my mom's Ojibwe, my grandmother's Ojibwe, I'm going to give this a try. And I remember going to the bookstore and picking up this book, Portage Lake, by the late Modkak, the Nawakamagukwebun, opening it up and seeing this word, Ishkwa Manominikewan. And I was taken aback. I asked myself, who uses a word this long? What does this mean? How will I ever pronounce it? And I remember after that first semester of Ojibwe, being so excited the first time I had heard the story about myself, a story I'd never been told. And despite having moved to another country to learn another language, I went all in Ojibwe. Any opportunity I had to study, I took courses. I studied at Minneapolis Community and Technical College, Fond du Lac Tribal College, and then ultimately at University of Minnesota, where I had a chance to study with fluent first language speakers, with elders, with traditional and hereditary chiefs, with medicine people, as well as with maybe the world's leading linguistic expert in the language. And after I graduated, I had a chance to teach for a little bit, and then went back into grad school where I studied linguistics, the scientific study of language. And while I was working on the Ojibwe People's Dictionary, I began to notice patterns that would show up. Unik would show up in these different environments. And because I didn't grow up with the language, because I didn't have that gift, I thought, well, if I can see where this shows up in different environments, maybe I can get a better understanding of what someone was saying 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 400, 800, literally thousands of years ago. So here's one, Anikunutage. It's to translate, it's to interpret. Say a word in one language and then repeat that in the target language of your audience. Aneke-ogamakwe. This is a vice president, a vice chief, a lieutenant governor. Those of you who are language students may notice that there's a kwe suffix at the end of this. It means I'm speaking about a woman. This could be a reference to Vice President Harris here in the United States, or Lieutenant Governor Flanagan here in Minnesota, who was the first Anishinaabe, the first Indigenous woman to hold that position. Here's Anekegama. There are a number of these where I grew up in north central Minnesota. Chains of lakes, bodies of water that are interconnected with each other in Anakobadun. It's when you've run out of thread. You're at the end of your thread and you tie another piece of thread to it. You've connected them. You've interlinked them. When I asked an elder what that word meant to him, he thought about it pensively for a moment. Looked at me. He knew I had a Western education, a Western background, and he said, it's a lot like a bike chain. From his perspective, this would be my great-grandparents, my grandparents, my parents, and myself. We're interlinked. We're interconnected. So if we were to translate that word, if you look it up in the Ojibwe People's Dictionary, you'll see it in Danako-Bichigan can mean my great-grandparent, my ancestor. It can also, but if we were to spiritually interpret this word, I think it would mean that being I'm inextricably interconnected to, that being I'm inextricably linked to. And in Anishinaabe, it's also our word for my great-grandchild. We use the same word for one another. When I first heard that, I actually asked myself, I wonder if they're actually saying, I am you. So in Danako-Bichigan, my great-grandparent, my great-grandchild, my ancestor, I'm inextricably interconnected to you. This is a picture of my grandmother with my son. Here is in Danako-Bichigan. The generations that are linked to one another. So if we look at this petroglyph holistically, if it works going up, it should work going down. This is Nin, I, me, myself. Ngosis, my son. Indonis, my daughter. Nujis, my grandchild. And then, of course, Danako-Bichigan, my great-grandchild. And they call me Danako-Bichigan, my great-grandparent. So if we look at that word logically, it implies 7 generations. 7 generations that are punctuated intergenerationally by this concept of I'm inextricably interconnected to you. I'm inextricably linked to you. Whatever is going to affect me is going to affect you, and vice versa. Whatever affects you will affect me. This idea of sequence, this idea of interconnection, I brought up a number of teachings that take place both scientifically and spiritually all over the world. One of the spiritual teachings that came to mind immediately was karma. Karma, it's an ancient Sanskrit word. Sometimes we mistake it for the law of cause and effect, but really your karma, it has in it kri. It's your actions, your deeds. So you may develop good karma. You've acted altruistically, with benevolence, with kindness, with generosity, thinking about the benefit of your actions to your relatives. And this is what will come back to you. You may also have bad karma. Maybe you've acted in a way that's either mischievous or even malevolent, and that is what will return to you. This action that has a reaction. This concept shows up in so many Eastern Asian spiritual traditions. In the Middle East, this will become you will reap what you sow, particularly in the New Testament. Whatever seed you plant in the ground, that is what you should expect to grow. Jesus is probably more explicit about this when he states, if you live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. Your actions will have a reaction, and it will have a reaction that echoes intergenerationally. Shows up, of course, as a law of physics. For every action, there's going to be an equal reaction. And the first time I saw a double helix, after learning this word in Danako-Bichigan, to be interconnected, to be interlinked, what I saw here were links in a chain. And I asked myself, well, what did I inherit from my great-grandparents? What am I passing down to my great-grandchildren? It's my DNA. It's the very building blocks of my being. And it made me take a moment and ask myself, well, what was my great-grandfather's experience like? And if he was born in, he was born 100 years before me, he was born in 1875, he'd see a great deal of change in his life. He'd see the creation of the reservation. This was a place he couldn't leave without express written consent from the Indian agent. If he left, he would be deemed hostile. I mean, a modern term for that is an enemy combatant. Someone the United States military could engage with, could possibly kill. He'd see a great deal of change in his spiritual life as well. I'm sure you probably noted that I introduced myself in the Ojibwe language, and while Wayne was doing that wonderful and kind introduction, I had Inginukwezige. I was burning sweetgrass. I smudged. And in my great-grandfather's age, that was an arrestable offense. That was an arrestable offense until 1978 in the United States, when the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was passed. I'd be 3 years old at that time. And he would also see a great deal of change in his family life. If you're wondering why I didn't hear the Ojibwe language until I was a 25-year-old man, there's a very good reason for that. And that's because my mother and my grandmother would go to boarding schools. My grandmother went to a residential school in Canada. My mother went to a boarding school here in the United States. Here are the 4 generations. My son is about 14 hours old, maybe here. But here we are all together. And the schools they went to, boarding and residential schools, these were total institutions. These are places where the clothes you wear, the food you eat, when you sleep, the language you speak, when you pray, the books you read, when you go to class, when you line up, when you go outside, when you go to the bathroom, all of these things are determined for you by the institution. And we all know of 2 perfect examples of these. One would be the military, the other prison. And we know that there are many children who did not survive the boarding school and the residential school experience. They just simply did not make it home. And there are others who went through a great deal of trauma in these places. There are numerous accounts of emotional, mental, spiritual, physical, and sexual abuse that took place here. And the idea is that in newest studies in epigenetics, in inherited trauma, intergenerational trauma, have shown that if you go through something incredibly traumatic, particularly if you were a child, this is when most people went to residential school or boarding school. It's when they're young children. If you go through incredible stress, duress, and trauma, your body will literally create chemicals that can alter your DNA. It's your body acting intelligently. It's giving the next generation a better opportunity of succeeding in the new environment. So we have people today who, like myself, I can choose to live anywhere I'd like here in the United States. I can pray and speak the language without any fear of persecution. I even had an opportunity to learn in school. I have a chance to raise my children at home. Yet, in our communities, we still see people struggling with a myriad of issues. The opioid epidemic has hit our communities very hard, either on the reservation or in the metro area. Methamphetamine abuse, unsafe sexual practices, people who may be dealing with gambling or internet addiction, as well as alcoholism. And asking ourselves, well, why? We didn't have to go through that. Why are we struggling with this today? And we may have people who are dealing with someone's pain that is not their own. Someone who is dealing with intergenerational trauma. And I say that at this point only to point out that the moment you recognize that the moment you may be dealing with someone's pain that is not yours, you have an opportunity to healing. That may be a catalyst for healing. The moment you say, I will not pass this down to the next generation. I think we need to point out as well, too, we did not just inherit trauma. That in the year 2023, after yet another pandemic, despite a systematic effort to destroy the language, the culture, the history, the spirituality, we have endured. We are still here. I still have an opportunity to use the language and share some of these words that are literally thousands of years old with you all. And it shows me that we've also inherited courage, strength, fortitude, resilience, and that's what I want to pass down to the generations who are coming. So the first time this clicked, 7 generations, I was pretty excited about this because this idea of 7 generations, it's in our mandates, it's in our mission statements. There are even educational institutions named 7 generations. It shows up all over an Indigenous country. And I recall going to a course taught by an elder one evening. He asked if I understood this idea of 7 generations. I was like, I've heard of it. He's like, it's very simple. It's all in the language. Often as an Ojibwe teacher, I've been asked, well, how do you translate 7 generations into the language? And it's almost too clumsy of a question. The Ojibwe language and culture handles it with one relative term. And as this man began talking in class, he shared about people he saw when he was growing up. The term would be Gete Anishinaabe. Old-time Indian was his translation. People who had been born on trap lines, in like log cabins, even in lodges. And he said when they reached a certain age, they tried to avoid using this word neen. You see it in the middle of this diagram. I, me, myself. If you see that neen translated into Latin, you'll recognize it immediately. It's ego. And I think what those elders were trying to do by example is say this idea of ego, it may not really exist. They're dealing with this problem that human beings have, because everyone watching this has dealt with someone who is egotistical, egocentric, maybe even egomaniacal, someone who is striving to be number one. How can I become more accomplished, more wealthy, more attractive, more cultured, more educated than you? I'm looking out for number one. They say this might be an illusion. I can't, as a human being, say I, me, myself. I'm a link in the chain going all the way back and going all the way forward. I am all of my relatives, and all of my relatives are me. For them, the spiritual teaching is only Kijemanadu, only the kind spirit, the benevolent mystery, the creator, can say I excluding you. Human beings can't. We're interconnected. We're related. So at this moment, it clicked. It made sense. These things I had heard in ceremony. These things, the philosophy I had heard in the language. The idea of 7 generations. The idea of being interconnected, of being interlinked, of being related. It all made sense. There was a moment of joy followed by this awesome, immense feeling rising within me. It was the birth of responsibility. Because I had scientific and spiritual proof at this moment that every single thing I am doing, and not just me, if you're watching this, every single thing we are doing, every action, choice, and decision is going to affect someone 7 generations from now. The question was no longer, why am I here? The culture and the spirituality had answered that for me. Here because I'm related. It's no longer why am I here, it became how. How do I live in a way that can bring peace and balance to my relatives? Can I live without conflict with them? How can I seek out a life that's holistic, life without contradiction, where I'm saying one thing and doing another? And people all over the world have been asking this question. This is Mahavira, and in the Jain faith, he spoke of moksha, mukti. He was liberated from that cycle of karma that kept him reincarnating lifetime after lifetime. For the Buddha, this was nibbana, nirvana in Sanskrit. He had put out the flames of desire. He was no longer reaching for it, grabbing for it. He no longer thirsted for it. He found freedom. For Lao Tzu, he spoke of living in accordance with the Tao, going along with the natural flow of the universe. Socrates spoke of living the examined life. For him, the unexamined life wasn't worth living. Jesus found within himself that divine spark, the kingdom of God. And our ancestors spoke of Minopumatsu, the good life, a life of peace, a life of balance. And I think it's important to point out that it's a verb. It's something you do. It's a way you act. It's a way you relate. It's to live well. It's to lead a good life. The natural consequence of that is to have good health. And our ancestors have left us a way to do this, called the Gichi Debak Konegewanan. Gichi means great. Gib is to measure. And Akon is with a wood-like article in the hand. The wood-like article they're speaking about is the Vukelich. It's the pipe stem. It means what we're about to discuss is something that's been meditated upon and mediated with maybe one of our most sacred gifts, the Opwagan, the pipe. Companion on the path of life to give thanks with, to ask for help, to acknowledge our relatives, to make relatives and even relationships with different nations. So I think if we were to translate this, it would mean the great law, the sacred law. And we also call the Gichi Debak Konegewanan the seven grandfather teachings. The first grandfather teaching we'll discuss today is Dabasen Dizuwan, humility. And I think to really understand this word, we should look at the culture and the spirituality and ceremony of our ancestors. And one of the most ancient ceremonies I found is called the Gi'agoshmoy, the Vision Quest. And I found an account that was written in 1904, completely in Ojibwe, by Gagi Benesiban, by the late Chief John Benesi from Fort William First Nation in Thunder Bay. And he recounted this to William Jones, and he said he was an old man in 1904. This must have taken place in the 1830s or even 1840s. He lived in a lodge in a Waginogan, and he was woken up one morning by his father. He used that old term for my father, Noose. Noose woke him up, and he noticed Noose had two dishes, two birch bark dishes. One had meat jim in it, food, breakfast, weos venison, manoman wild rice, minan berries, and the other had a kakanje, charcoal. So the boy knows he's being presented a choice. There's an incredibly important spiritual teaching here. No one can do it for you. No one can make you do it. If you choose to have a spiritual experience like this, it has to be your decision. And no one else can have this experience for you. It has to be exclusively you. So the boy picks the charcoal. The old man picks up the charred piece of wood and Makadeke blackens his face with it. And for the next 4 days and 3 nights, he goes without food, he goes without water, in isolation and solitude on Anamikiwachawing, on Thunderbird Mountain, on Mount McKay. And I don't know if you've ever had to fast for either spiritual or medical reasons, but I think everything past day 1 without water gets very uncomfortable. So this boy, as the sun is going down, you're on Lake Superior, it's starting to get cold. I wonder if he's asking himself, where would I get food right now? How would I get some of that water in Lake Superior? How would I create a lodge and get even a fire? What kind of medicine would I take to heal me? He's learning something incredibly important. What happens to a human being without food, water, clothing, or shelter? You will die. You will die without those basic core human needs being met. For the rest of his life, whenever he meets someone without those needs being met, he will feel a real and genuine and authentic empathy for them. It's November here in the United States. Soon we'll celebrate Thanksgiving. And as an Indigenous person, I've been asked before, well, why did they help those people who would ultimately end up colonizing and settling Mikanako-Minising, Turtle Island? Why did they help them? It was because it was embedded in their spirituality. This is how you should treat your fellow relative if they're in need. So when we look at this word, dabasein dezo, we look at what it means in its word parts. Dabas is low, ain is to think, and dezo is of oneself. I think lowly of myself. The human being at this point realizes that I have a relationship to the four-legged, to the winged ones, to the birds, to the swimmers, to the fish, to the mittigug, to the trees. The trees are giving me a lodge, they're giving me fire, they're giving me the very oxygen I need to breathe. The mushkaki, the medicine. In that word for medicine literally means mushk, strength, and aki, the earth. The strength of the earth heals and nourishes us. And the Nabi, the water, is giving life to all of it. Anishinaabe at this point realizes I have a relationship to each one of these beings. I have a relationship to the earth, to the water, to the plants, trees, and to all of the animals, fish, and birds. It's that relationship that makes them relatives. When we speak of a word like humility, dabasein dezo, what he's saying is that I am not more important than all of my relatives. In fact, I cannot survive without you. I think lowly of myself. In one etymology, the story of a word that I heard for Anishinaabe that came from Nikagun Sminikoning. From the Red Gut Reservation in northwestern Ontario was Anisha, for nothing. And Abe, the being, the one who is nothing without his or her relatives. Heard in the Onegaming area of Lake of the Woods, it's the one who is humble before the Creator. And Dabasendis. And that kind of humility brings with it respect. The moment this boy realizes that he has to hunt, fish, harvest, and that if these relatives don't look after him, then he will die. He goes easy on them. He takes only what he needs. In this menaji, if you look this up in the dictionary, it's to use sparingly, it's to go easy on. What he is saying here is, I will take only what I need, enough to feed myself, clothe myself, shelter myself, heal myself, and then I will leave the rest behind. I'll go easy on it. I'll respect it. I will acknowledge the sacredness and sanctity of my relatives' lives. And this is reciprocal. From an Ojibwe perspective, it's also the animals, it's also the plants, it's the water who are going easy on us, saying that if we do not look after this human being, the human will die. We will go easy on them. We will acknowledge that their lives too are sacred. Why? I wonder if this child, the ending of his first night of fasting, is wondering, well, who else in my life gives me food, water, clothing, and shelter? Who else gives me a place to live? My parents, my relatives. Why do they do that? Because they love us. Because they love us. That word, sagatchue, sagietuen. I would say this is not a definition of love. I think the language is trying to describe how something eternal moves within us. This is a friend of mine's name, Sagatchue. Zog, it's to emerge, and that's the same Zog that shows up in Sagietuen. And Aju is the mountain. What I love about this video is at the end of his first night of fasting, Bidaban, as dawn approaches, this is exactly what this boy would have seen. And in a moment, you'll see Sagatchue. The one coming from behind the mountain. It's Gimishomasanan, it's our grandfather, it's the sun. And this boy seeing this realizes that when the sun rises, who is the sun shining on? Everyone and everything. What we're seeing here is, what does unconditional love look like? It has to be something for everyone and everything. I've had a chance to visit this place, Mount McKay, Anamiki Wachuing, Thunderbird Mountain, and to see Wainabosho, you see the sleeping giant there. And in Minnesota, we call the month of May Sagi Bagagisis. This is mandamin, corn. And once it's planted in the spring, The days become longer, becomes warmer. The thunderbirds fly overhead. And somewhere deep within the seed, all of a sudden, life emerges. Zog, Zagi Baga. Now, when this corn comes to fruition, corn will feed a thief or a teacher, a saint or a sinner. We're seeing by example, by lived example, what does unconditional love look like? It's not the definitions we come up with as human beings, criteria that people have to meet in order for them to prove that they love us. We're seeing by example what that must look like. You can also say to have compassion, to bless and show unconditional love. You can use that word joanum as well. And you'll hear this at the end of ceremonies. Joanum mishanam, joanum mishanam, joanum mishanam, joanum mishanam. That if I am all of my relatives and all of my relatives are me, if I truly believe in something, if I truly want something, I should ask for my relatives the same thing I would ask for myself. And this word, which for me is a prayer in itself, is to ask for all of us, to please bless us, to please have compassion for all of us, and please love all of us unconditionally. And if you have someone in your life who you love like that, that love that's coming out of you, that's for the benefit of all of your relatives, you can always say, Gizaki, and I love you, and Gizhawainamin, I love you. I say that to my son every day. I'll see you later when I'm dropping him off at school. I love you. In a moment, I've always felt like this is an important point on Saki Ittizo, to love oneself. That if you are all of your relatives and all of your relatives are you, you should show yourself that same love and compassion. And it's not egocentric. You're simply loving your relative. You're loving yourself. You too are deserving of that love as well. That kind of love will change the very way you lead your life. This word, Zungide Ewan, bravery, courage, it has in it Kur, which is heart. It's exactly what we're saying in Ojibwe. Courageous to lead a life of heart. If you tell someone you are brave in Ojibwe, you're saying you have a strong heart. Gezungide. And there was a story that radically transformed the way I looked at what this word meant. It's the coming of the Dakota drum, the Bwanji Dewa Igan, Wani Dewa Igan, to the Ojibwe here in Minnesota. And it said in the early 1860s, maybe even mid 1860s, there is a Dakota village that is attacked by the Chimokumanu, by the Americans, by the long knives. It's a reference to the bayonets at the end of the rifles. And the soldiers in the Dakota went to the Dakota territories and attacked a village. They had every intention of decimating it, annihilating it. And it said a woman, Wiaka Shintemi, tail feather woman, hides for her life in a nearby pond. She remains completely submerged underwater. She uses a hollow reed to breathe through. She hides for her life for the next 3 to 4 days, under constant fear of being discovered and being killed on sight. And while she's hiding for her life, it's said that she receives a vision. Or Wakantaka, the great mystery, the great spirit tells her that the spirit is very disappointed in how human beings are living. There's a great deal of brutality that's taking place right now. The Civil War has ended. The wars for the Great Plains are raging. In the Dakota, they aren't just fighting the Americans, they're also in a war with the Ojibwe. A war that had been taking place for 100 or maybe even 200 winters. And it's said that Wiaka Shintewin is told that if the Dakota were to present a drum to the Ojibwe, it would bring peace to both of their nations. She sees a vision of a drum like this. Is able to mystically escape. She brings this vision to a nearby Dakota village. She relates it to the holy men there, and they begin at once creating the Bwanji Dewa Igan, the Dakota drum. And it said when they bring this drum to Mrs. Ogiganing, the original Midewakan, the original Mystic Lake. That both nations were able to sit at the drum. And when they sound it, they are playing the instrument that makes the sound of the heart. Day is the heart. Wait, it's the sound of voice in a gun. It's an instrument. It's a tool. And it represents both of their hearts beating as one. When they begin singing the songs they've exchanged, they're speaking with one voice. The smoke that's coming up from the chunupa, from the OTWA gun, from the sage, the sweetgrass, the cedar, the asema, the tobacco, it represents both of their thoughts and prayers raising up to the heavens. And at that moment, they say, no matter what happens, I will never strike you again. I will never raise my hand to you again. And these were people who brought the worst of what war has to offer to each other for hundreds of years. Pain, bereavement, terror, rage, anxiety, fear, poverty. And they were able to sit with one another and say, no matter what happens, my children will not inherit war from me the way I have inherited. I have inherited it from my relatives. And I think it's striking that these drums are still played today in acknowledgement of this peace, this ceremony. And for me, this is important because it shows me that reconciliation is possible. There is an example of people who had such animosity towards one another being able to create reconciliation, and that if it's done the right way, if it's done with true strength of heart, then it's possible. For me, at this point, Zungade'ewen was no longer I am unafraid to fight Dakotas. It became I am utterly unafraid to treat Dakotas as a relative. And that takes a great deal of strength of heart. It takes a great deal of courage. This will show up in other spiritual traditions like Buddhism or even Christianity as loving one's enemy. Here we see a perfect example of how to do that from an indigenous perspective. That kind of strength of heart reminds me of this word, Debwewen. Like Dewe Egan, it's the sound of the heart. Debwe, to speak the truth. That has in it de, the heart, in way to speak. I am speaking to you from my heart. I am speaking to you from the very center and core of my being. And this is a perfect place to create that distinction between truth and honesty. And now I know in North American English, if you tell the truth, you're honest. If you're honest, you tell the truth. In Anishinaabe, it's not just what you say, it's how you live. This word has in it otsi, which is to live a certain way. Guac is straight, proper, correctly, in order. What we're saying here is that are your words in alignment with your actions? Because everyone will have this happen to you at least once in your life where you have someone who tells you to dress a certain way, act a certain way, speak a certain way, do a particular ceremony, and then you see them doing something completely different on a Friday or Saturday night out on the town. It's contradiction. It's hypocrisy. I love the beauty of the Ojibwe language, stating that if you really want to know the truth, observe how I live my life. The truth will invariably come out. It always does. What does it do? To live correctly, to lead a life with order. A life where my words are in alignment with my actions. If you are able to do that, if you're able to lead a life with humility, with respect, with love, with strength of heart, with truth and honesty, then every one of your actions, every one of your decisions will be positively beneficial. Not just for all of your relatives now, but all of your relatives coming 7 generations from now. You will act with great wisdom, with great intelligence, with enlightenment. You will be able to see things exactly as they are. And in closing, I hope I've had an opportunity this morning to share with you what I think is a 13,000-year investment in us. We are not the only culture who has asked, well, what would I pass down to someone I'll never see, speak to, listen to, or hold? I want to share with them my knowledge, my experience. These are hieroglyphs. Earlier, we started with the petroglyph, something that's carved into stone. Hieroglyphs would be like sacred writing. These were literally carved into stone. Here's an example of Egyptian hieroglyphs. And on the right, you can see that this was a huge leap forward. People realized, oh, they weren't just drawing pictures, they were literally writing. But at one point, people forgot how to read the hieroglyphs. They'll even forget what language they're in. And all of the knowledge and wisdom was consigned to silence. It'll happen here in Mesoamerica as well. The Mayans had incredibly detailed astronomical knowledge. They could make predictions of where stars and planets would be, and then even align huge pyramids with those. And in one of the most cruel legacies of colonization, their books will be burned, and people will forget how to read the knowledge that was inscribed into stone. They carved this into stone. So our ancestors must have asked, well, what would I pass down to someone I'll never see, speak to, listen to, or hold? I truly believe they said, I would show them how to lead a good life. We know that anything we create will one day turn to dust. What would I pass them down that has real value, real worth? I'd show them how to lead a life of peace and balance, how to live in balance with their relatives and their environment, how to lead a life without contradiction, where they're saying one thing and then doing another. A holistic life, a holy life, a good life. How will we do that? How will we pass these teachings down? We will put them in the language. As that elder pointed out to me earlier in this talk, it's all in the language. It would take me a year to really realize, oh, it's literally in the language. It's literally in these small word parts that are in the words. Why put it in the language? Because as human beings, we use language for the same reason that we can touch, smell, see, taste, or hear. It's hardwired in our brains. What I don't think anyone could have seen was a period like the boarding school or residential school era, a period when we did not use the language. So I hope I've had an opportunity to share with you that some examples and just a handful of words of how much knowledge and wisdom is embedded in the language. And then as we find ourselves at a crossroads, we realize that we can't make anyone change. It's a futile task. It's a fool's errand. We cannot make anyone change. However, if we are all of our relatives and all of our relatives are us, we can change the one person that we can, without a doubt, change, and that's ourselves. But it has to be our choice. It has to be our decisions. And I hope I've laid out that our choices and our decisions are important. They don't just affect us, they affect all of our relatives. And they affect our relatives past, present, and future. A scope of 7 generations. And that only you, it can only be your choice, it can only be your decision to change your life. And keep in mind that if you are all of your relatives and all of your relatives are you, if you choose to change yourself, have you in fact changed all of your relatives? And if you're looking for the ripple effect, observe how if you change yourself, how does that change how I relate to my family and clan? How my family and clan then relate to the community, and how that community relates to the world. And when asked, well, how should I do that? How should I change my life in a way that's positively beneficial, not just for all of my relatives now, but someone coming 7 generations from now? And seek out a life with Deboywan, with truth, speaking from your heart with Dabasaindazuan, with humility, where you don't exalt yourself above your relatives, where you say, I am all of my relatives, with MAHUBE-OTWA, with respect, to acknowledge the sanctity, the sacredness of all of your relatives, with Zaki-OTWA, that compassionate, unconditional love, with Zungide-Ewan, with that strength of heart. We'll need strength of heart to make those hard decisions. With Gwak-Watizuan, with virtue, with righteousness, with honesty, a holistic life where your words are in alignment with your actions. And act with true wisdom, with true insight, in a way that's positively beneficial for someone coming 7 generations from now. And you will truly lead a good life, a life worth living. You'll truly have Minopamatsuan. I'm going to take a moment and say, Pajigo, Miigwech, Bizendawi. Thank you all so much for listening. I am absolutely delighted to have had this opportunity to speak with you all. And I'd like to take a few moments to answer some questions. But before we do, there's one last thing. If you've watched this, that last slide I showed you with the 7 grandfather teachings, it's right here. If you've watched this on Zoom today, feel free to check out my website at jamesvukelich.com. That's a downloadable, so you can download that. I had this one made at Walgreens, but you can download it and make a poster if you'd like, or and post it anywhere. Again, a moment of me saying Pajigo Miigwech. Thank you so much for listening, and hopefully something that you can use in your day-to-day life. So Pajigo Miigwech Bizendawi. Thank you all so much for listening. And I'd be delighted to take a question or two. I know we have a few moments left here.
Apajigo Miigwech Gagigadoya and Oma Nungum, James. Thank you so much for speaking here today. And yeah, we do have a couple questions, and I posted your website in the chat. So people have access to that. And we do have a question from the audience, but I want to start with one that I kind of had, I was thinking about last night, preparing for this. So in your book, and just here today, you said that you didn't hear Ojibwe until you were 25 years old. You know, I was in my mid-20s when I first heard it, and then I wasn't serious about it until in my 30s. But because of residential schools, which you talked about, trauma, there are a lot of Anishinaabe, you know, in the same boat as us and don't start to explore their language and their culture until later in life. Do you have any advice for those who are just starting on their journey, or some ways to help them get started and to begin that process?
Well, advice would be, one, I was actually a slide, Zaki Dizo, or Joinen Dizo, which would be to have compassion for yourself, or to show yourself some love. If you do begin this journey, and I highly suggest you do, even if your goal isn't to become a fluent speaker, I think you'll find even learning some of these words, even learning a little bit of the culture, can really enrich your life. It can add to your life in ways that that you may not even be able to see right now. So for me, it was transformative. As you begin learning the language, I was lucky because I'd studied another language, so I'd learned how to learn a language, and that's a skill in itself, to actually learn how to learn a different language. But to take it and approach it with kindness towards yourself, you're learning an incredibly sophisticated, elegant, and complex language. And it will, if you do it right, you will spend the rest of your life learning. So my suggestion is always to learn to enjoy learning, to learn to enjoy making mistakes. If you're not making mistakes, you're not doing it right. If you're not learning every day, you're not, I don't think, getting the most out of it. Because again, even after 20 years, all I have to do is pick up a book and I will see an insight. If I'm really paying attention, if I'm looking closely, where I've learned to enjoy reaching for it, to enjoy learning from it. So to take it easy on yourself. And there are a number of resources that are online. I know Dr. Troyer, Wagosh, Anton Troyer, has posted a number of resources at the Bemidji State University website. He has a really nice compilation. I personally like using the Rosetta Stone project, Rosetta Stone program that came from Mille Lacs. I like doing that with my son. It makes it so I don't have to be Ojibwe teacher dad. And my son, who is a natural teacher, loves to, answer the questions. And he's like, don't worry, Dad, I've got it. So those are some that I would really suggest. And then to enjoy learning it rather than making it like a task, a chore, or something you don't look forward to doing. And so that's incredibly important. And to be compassionate towards yourself. Again, it is incredibly complicated, and that has been my approach.
Awesome. Yeah, and this next question came from the audience, and it kind of just ties right into Zaga Idizo. All the teachings go hand in hand. Leaving out even one of the teachings means one is not embracing the teachings. Love, we must first love ourselves before we can show love to someone else. What can you say to those who are in a place where they don't love themselves? And you kind of touched on that, but
Again, well, for me, that approach, we don't really have a chance to get into it, became with awareness of how I was speaking to myself. Because I have caught myself, and this would actually be a process with Ayangwamizan, being aware, being cautious, or just totally attending a situation with awareness. Became the zone where I was beginning to learn about myself and seeing that I would say absolutely terrible things to myself often. I would critique myself. I would be mean to myself, seriously mean, and it to such an extent that I wouldn't even say these things to people I dislike. Yet I would say them to myself very often. That point, the moment you say, oh, if I wouldn't treat my relatives this way, should I treat myself this way? For me, then the logic of that, it made it very easy to, even if I wasn't showing myself care and concern, to come up with the reason why I shouldn't do that. It wasn't making my life better. It wasn't making me better. In fact, it was bringing me down. And that if I truly wanted to make a contribution to my relatives in the best way possible, I should probably be kind to myself by example. Again, to get away from when I spoke about honesty, living a correct life, that kind of unintentional hypocrisy or contradiction where if you're mean to yourself, but you're very kind to other people, again, that's not a very holistic life. Mm-hmm. It's not one you'll be able to continue for a very long time. Whereas I wanted to have that holistic life, a life without that contradiction, or saying one thing and then doing another. And so I think it can begin there. It can begin there with showing yourself compassion, with showing yourself at least just going easier on yourself too. To respect oneself would be to go easy on oneself.
Miigwech
for the person who asked that. I really appreciate that question.
And we have one last one. We have just a couple minutes here, but this one comes from one of our staff. We have many early childhood classrooms here at MAHUBE-OTWA. How do we make sure we're using our time with children to encourage connection to culture?
Again, that's a hard question. For me, it is always, when we're talking about like an institution or a place that we work at, the change begins with me. And again, that is self-knowledge, that's awareness, that's where you're asking yourself, well, how am I relating to my relatives today? Are the things I'm bringing, if it's into the classroom, if it's into this community, if it's in the organization itself, am I leading a life with Sakit doing, with love, with Deboywan, with truth, with Kwakwatizuan, with virtue, with honesty, with Dabasendazuan, with humility, with Manachituan, with respect, Zungide Ewan, with strength of heart, with courage, bravery, with Nibwakawan. For me, that is the best way to ensure that you're bringing those to those situations, the community and to the people you're relating with on a daily basis. And it becomes, you lead by example in that case. It's not coming from somewhere else. You are being the relative you want your relatives to see, to interact with.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And once again, James, thank you so much for coming and speaking today and talking on the seven grandfather teachings and MAHUBE-OTWA. I think you've given us a lot to think about, and you've given me a lot of new words to start working on as well. So miigwech. Everyone out there in Facebook world, thank you so much for tuning in today, and everyone have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Miigwech Bizendoig. Miigwech